look bad as well. It never really says, but I doubt this prayer group met many times. Mary Robinson's name was in the news. The whole story was out. She was having the affair, but she wasn't having the affair, and all of this stuff gets out. It's so funny because the movie The Exorcist came out around this time. And this was basically a real-life version of that. Didn't have the creepy girl, it didn't have some of the Hallmark elements, but it has a poodle getting its legs ripped off and a woman getting her face peeled off by hand. That's some Hellraiser stuff. That's way more intense than an Exorcist. It's real, and it's gross, and it's sticky, and it's wet, and that is exactly what a demon would want. I said earlier I don't know if Michael Taylor is still alive, but I can almost guarantee that the demon is. But you have to wonder, is it out there? Is it still out there at some church? It had so much fun last time taking a body for a joyride and experiencing the pleasures of the flesh with the power of dark forces. Is it out there again just looking for someone to take over and then become a forgotten story? But the demon never forgets how much fun it has. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. Twitter is @JasonOCarpenter. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one, guys. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, where we listen to a classic episode, the new intro, let you kind of know what's going on behind the scenes, how we came across this. Now, our first story was interesting because I just stumbled across it. The Pine Gap Group. It's kind of hard to do this if you. This is the reason why I don't like doing inside jokes and stuff like that, because when you take the episodes out of context, it can make it a little hard to get it. I think I give a good intro to it, but let me see if I can kind of make it a little more succinct. There was this crazy woman we had covered a couple episodes before this who was casting these spells or building some sort of force field or some other made-up nonsense. And she was trying to protect us from vampires and werewolves and golems and ghouls and snakes with 8 heads in the Pine Gap Group and then sorcerers. And I remember going, what in the world is the Pine Gap Group and how are they on the level of a werewolf? I'd never heard of these before. Well, one of you awesome dudes let me know that this was a conspiracy theory in Australia. It's basically their Area 51, their Stargate SG-1, underneath the mountain weirdo complex that had portals to Mars and laser beams and all sorts of stuff. But it was just this weird conspiracy theory, and to Australians, I'm sure it's a big threat. It's their Area 51, but I remember just thinking, is it still equivalent to a werewolf? I don't think so. But so our first story was just a weird conspiracy theory that just kind of popped out of nowhere. If I had stumbled across it and it wasn't surrounded by werewolves, probably wouldn't have even noticed it. But an interesting conspiracy theory nonetheless. And then the second story is a story that I knew I wanted to do really early on in the run of the show. I don't know why it took me so long to do it, but I'm glad that I did wait this long, because obviously the early episodes are far rougher. I've toyed with the idea of reinvestigating some of the older stories, but I've never really found any additional information on any of them. But when I listen to the older episodes, I know a lot of you guys like the early episodes. I'm not a huge fan of them. I don't like the delivery and stuff like that. So I'm actually glad that I waited so long to do this, because I think this is when the show really hit the stride. I think in the late hundreds, the show really hit its stride. I love this story. It's terrifying. Is Freddy Krueger based on a true story? It's funny because if you listen to the director's commentary for Nightmare on Elm Street, and I mentioned this in the episode, I remember I love director's commentary. I was listening to it, and he tells the story of how Freddy Krueger is based on a real dream demon, and it just makes your imagination run wild. And the hardest part of this story wasn't telling it, because I'd heard this story a long time ago from Wes Craven directly on the commentary. It was hard tracking down the links again, finding these articles in the LA Times and things like that. I was kind of nervous going into the story because this is a story I had told people in real life throughout the years. Hey, buddy, have you ever heard this stuff? It's funny because I always pitch the show like this. Imagine you're at work or you're at school or you're sitting on your couch and your buddy walks in and goes, dude, you won't believe what I read on the internet. That's what this show is. That's what this show is. A lot of complaints about the show. Again, I don't really read complaints, but what I've gotten from the first two sentences, generally, is that it's not serious enough. But the show was never meant to be a serious show. Sometimes the topics get serious. And I do the research that I do because I have to back it up, but the idea of the show is your buddy showing up and being like, dude, you won't believe what happened. And the reason why I think the show works is because I've been doing that my entire life. I would walk into work and be like, dude, did you know Freddy Krueger is based on a true story? And so I was telling that story for 2 decades. I've been telling that story, honestly, since I saw the commentary, like in the early 2000s. So when I had to prepare for this story, I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to find the links, but I did. And I now present to you, I think, one of the most terrifying stories. It's not as scary as the Michael Taylor one, if you listened to that one yesterday. Not nearly as scary as that, but I definitely think it's a scary episode in and of itself, and the implications are scary. Freddy Krueger's real, or something like Freddy Krueger's real. All bets are off to what other boogeymen could be out there. So let's listen to episode 218. Is Freddy Krueger based on a real demon? Spoiler alert, yeah, he is. The Pine Gap Group. A simple CIA monitoring station, or a gateway to other realities. And then we take a look at the fascinating true story behind the Nightmare on Elm Street. Is there really a Freddy Krueger type demon that kills people in their sleep? We'll find out today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I'm so sweaty. We've reached, guys, it has almost been a year. This podcast has almost been on for an entire year. We started in June. I think it was June 14th, June 15th. Almost a full year of Dead Rabbit Radio. So I'm super stoked about that. Like, I think in the back of my head, I always thought, I think in the early ones, I'm going to do 100 episodes and we'll go from there. Almost a year, guys. Thank you so much for being part of this journey, too. Thank you. You guys are really the driver of this journey. Speaking of which, I want to start highlighting some more fan art. Today we have something kind of interesting. It'll be in the show notes if you want to click on it. I'm just going to have a gallery on there. And then on YouTube, you'll see it up here. Merrick, via Facebook, went to... I did a story a while back about the Finn McCool, the giants who were basically like rolling around in the dirt. They weren't doing that. They were giants who were fighting, and then one decided to become a baby and all that stuff. He went to the cave where this story apparently took place. Like, he found the Giant's Causeway. It's not like he was Indiana Jones, like it's on the map, but he went to Giant's Causeway in Scotland or Ireland, one of the two, and took a photo of it and sent it. And he goes, I went here because of the episode. Now, I don't think he was traveling from, like, Alabama. I'm pretty sure he lived in the area. He's just like, oh, that's across the street. But still, it's awesome. Like, again, I never really thought the show would get like that, where people would hear something and it would inspire them to go on a little trip. And that's amazing. So thank you, Merrick. Thanks for that great photo. And we just have a ton of fan art we're going to be showing in the coming days and weeks and years as well. But let's go ahead and get started with our first story. Now, our first story is interesting because I actually was joking about it. And I go, who are these guys? What puts them on the same level as a vampire or a werewolf? I wasn't aware of what the Pine Gap Group was. But when I was reading Sherry Schreiner's prayer, she was telling everyone to be protected by this stuff. She mentioned, along with witch doctors and Kabbalah priests and Satan worshippers, the Pine Gap Group. So, of course, I was curious to what they were. At that point, I was just reading it. I was reading that live. Like, I hadn't gotten that far into the prayer before, so I really was like, who are these dudes? Alex F. on YouTube was like, it's actually a real... Because I said it's either totally fake or a super obscure conspiracy, and Alex F. on YouTube said it is real. The Pine Gap is a base in Australia. It's a satellite observation base. So I started to look into what the Pine Gap Group was. So thank you, Alex, for that. And he's right. It is a satellite observation base in Australia, and it is so much more. So bizarre. So bizarre. What it is that and as I'm reading up on it, it's not a lot of information on it. Even the conspiracy stuff is very, very sparse. But I'm reading up about the Pine Gap facility in Australia, and I'm like, why does the US, why does the CIA, the NSA, and the NRO, which is the National Reconnaissance Organization, why do they have a facility in Australia? Now, Australia is an allied country to the United States. They're part of the Seven Eyes. That's 7 countries that we allow information to be shared with, and anyways, it causes controversy because Australia can't spy on its own citizens and America can't spy on its own citizens, but what happens is the Americans will spy on the Australian citizens and then give the information to the Australian government. That all came out during the Seven Eyes revelation. So it makes sense that we would have an observation base there, but I'm still thinking, like, why Australia? It turns out the Pine Gap, it's interesting because there's 2 levels to this. One, there's the legit conspiracies, like Seven Eyes, and then there's the wackadoo nutjob Sherry Shriner stuff. And actually, to be fair, I think Sherry Shriner is more on the realistic stuff a bit, but the Pine Gap facility in Australia, it's in a perfect location. It's in the middle of nowhere, so you don't have to worry about people stumbling across it. 2, it gives it access to 1/3 of the satellites that cover the globe. And what it basically picks up cell phone calls, it picks up satellite transmissions, it picks up anti-aircraft and anti-missile frequencies, so they kind of know where all this stuff is moving. So what's covered is all of China. All basically is Asia. Anything that's satellite-based coming in or out of Asia is intercepted by Pine Gap. The Asian part of Russia, so the Tatar Empire stuff is all intercepted. I'm sure there's only like 5 satellites beaming down stuff to Siberia, but they can get them. And then Middle East. So originally it was set up there in the 60s as a Cold War preventative measure. It could tell if missiles were being launched. And then it was being used to ensure that the nuclear treaties were intact. But then after 2001... September 12th, 2001, they basically pivoted their entire operation to spying on everybody. Now we get into the weirdo stuff. And I think that is interesting. I had a lot of fun researching that stuff because we do have issues with government spying on their own citizens, wink wink. They're spying on other people's citizens, but just trading information. And Edward Snowden mentioned the Pine Gap group, the Pine Gap facility specifically when all this was going on. But let's get into the weirdo stuff. So in December 22nd, 1989, there's 3 hunters out in that area because it's the wilderness of Australia. They're out there, they're hunting, they're actually getting ready to come back from their hunting trip, and they see what appears to be a man-made camouflage door, a hangar door, in the middle of this field. And they're like, this is out of place. This is totally not... It's basically like a giant metal hangar door with like a bunch of leaves thrown on top of it. And they're like, and they obviously are like, that's not something that should be here. There shouldn't be a big hangar door out here in the middle of nowhere. But then the door opens, and a large silver disc flies out of the hangar and flies away. And they're totally stunned by it. They can't believe what they just saw. They actually tell a friend of theirs who's a university professor, who ends up telling a local UFOologist, and that's how we know about it. So you're like, oh, cool, UFOs are involved in Pine Gap. Oh, I'm not finished yet. That would have been interesting enough. In 1980, a police officer was helping the search for a missing child. How a child goes missing in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the outback, who knows? But apparently he's looking for... That kid must be like a track star. He's like leaving Melbourne, just running for days. Actually, maybe he got lost from the facility, but he's like this mutant kid. He's Bat Boy they're trying to catch. 1980, he's in the area of the Pine Gap facility looking for this kid, sees a camouflage door. What? He then sees what he describes as several bathtub... You guys know what a bathtub looks like. I don't have to explain it. Unless you have like a fancy-dancy bathtub that's like... What if it's one of those standing bathtubs that the elderly people use? He sees a couple of those fly out too. Anyways, he sees several bathtub-shaped objects fly out of the man-made covered door, and he's watching them fly across the landscape, and then he goes in the hills. I saw basically a black void open up, and they flew into that. So not another door. It was something that seemed unreal to him. Traveled across the landscape, went into there. 1973. There's a report, again, some hunters by the Pine Gap facility. They describe this. A blue beam shoots up into the sky from inside the base. So they see the perimeter of the base and they see a blue beam shoot up. And then a UFO, like a straight up traditional disc-shaped metallic disc UFO, begins hovering over the base about 1,000 feet in the air. And after a period of time, I think it was a couple minutes, it then flies away. They report that. 1984. Whoom.